Welcome to a new episode in our series Astrology in the 21st Century. Today we have a very special guest from Australia and nearby Melbourne, Shu Yap. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm very honored to be here.
And we take the computer to show our listeners what we are going to do today. Um, okay, we have a special site on our site AstroTalk. The address is astrotalk.vonabisw.de. You see this in the address up here. And if you go on that subsite, the astrologer Shu Yap from Australia, her biography, Free Will in Astrology. And first, I show you where she is living right now. And I made a playlist. If you click on this playlist link, you find a lot of interesting videos. This one, the first video is with Todd Hermes' YouTube channel. And yeah, there you find quite a number of information of her biography when she was talking with the host of that channel. And now I'm looking for Guildford. Shu, are you living in Guildford or close to Guildford?
I'm right in Guildford. Yes, all I think 200 of us or so. It's quite little quaint town.
So you are living in the town itself.
Yes, that's right. But
Okay.
I'm not right in town because I'm on a farm block. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
so
And
I'm the first farm out of town.
and this is what it looks like in Guildford. This is a nice video of people about the heritage of Guildford. Guildford has quite some heritage to show. So you see, it's a very nice landscape. There's no desert around. How far is it to the next part of the desert?
Well, this was actually probably taken in winter, but
Uh,
we have had a lot of rain. Because usually in summer it turns yellow, but we have had a lot of rain for the last 3 summers, so we've been really lucky in that regard. But
okay.
for us to get into the outback desert is quite a few hours away. But it does get quite dry where we are. So
Okay, very good. So
yeah.
before we start jumping back in your biography, where you were a young child in Malaysia before your family moved to Australia, I want to show the viewers what you are going to offer at Kepler College in Seattle, Washington State. If you go, Shu Yap at Kepler College, her solar return course starts in January 24. Now,
January the 20th,
right.
2024.
The 20th of January 2024. Uh, what's this course about?
Well, this is just a deep dive into the technique of solar revolutions, and a lot of it is based on Ben Dyke's translation of Abu Mashar,
Okay,
who is like a 9th century Arabic Persian astrologer.
okay,
Uh, there's some really great stuff in that book, and it's not just all traditional. I guess I start with some historical uses of solar returns, like how it's evolved over the ages and when it was first used, and then we move to some kind of modern interpretations, the way people have used it in modern times. But when we get to the real guts of it, it's really interesting techniques that I've found in this translation, which I also use in practice. So, yeah, it's a really great course. A lot of people find that the 5 weeks isn't long enough. And so I've kind of been creating a bit of an alumni of students, and we go through a monthly chart reading practice session. It's a program that I run called Third House Studio. Third house, given that we are practicing our craft and applying what we know and using real life case studies, and so that's going on right now as well. We're currently in the middle of a 6-month container, but yeah, anyway, this solar returns course is I think it's really fundamental because it's where all of the techniques can kind of meet, is at the solar returns. Like, so if you want to know what's happening in perfections, for example, you want to also see what that perfected planet is doing in the solar return chart. If you use Fidaria, then you want to see what that Fidaria Lord is doing in the solar returns chart for that year. So
let me interrupt you. If you talk about Fidaria, I was wondering. I was looking into Fidaria myself for my personal chart, and I understand all the problems with Fidaria, planets ruling a certain period of time. But then the nodes. We are talking about your node return when you started to start with astrology. How is it that a node can rule a Fidaria time period? First, you start
yeah.
with I'm 74, so I had my ruling north node behind me, and now I'm ruled by the south node. But what does that mean? The node is a point in the chart. It's not a planet. How can a
Mm.
point in a chart rule my time?
Well, you would really dive into that axis of the two signs for that period of time, as well as the ruling planet of that south node for you in that case. That essentially becomes
Ah, okay.
a key significator for that period of time.
So we are talking about the node as a starting point to find out the planets who are ruling the signs where the node is in.
Yes, and to a degree, we're looking at the story that the node has represented in your life, and those
Ah, okay.
themes and archetypes of that nodal story really come alive when the Fidaria nodal activations begin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there is some controversy around the nodes in terms of in the translations, there was some confusion around when the nodal periods were.
Okay.
Um, but it's been debunked now. Like there's two variations. Like some people in the past have used the nodes coming in, I think, after the Mars period. However, Rob Hand on his publishing site, I think it was the Arat Media site, he has a really fantastic article on there that shows where the discrepancy was in the translation and the misinterpretations were. So I'll send you the link
Okay.
to that article because it's a great one to follow
Okay.
up on.
Okay. So we now know the node itself is not ruling the time, but the node is giving you information what planet is relevant to rule that piece of time. That's
Yeah.
in short form
And
that.
and the houses that
Yeah.
it's
Okay.
situated in. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Now we have here the recommended text. You were talking about Abu Mashar on the revolutions of the years of nativity, translated by Benjamin Dykes. To tell you the truth, I find that book very high level. So let me ask you what sort of students you expect in your course. What do those students have to know before they can start your course?
yeah. Well, it doesn't cover the whole book. I cherry pick like I find what the most effective techniques are that I use in my practice from that book. And yes, it is
Yeah.
very complex. Abu Mashar I'm sure if he was alive today, he'd probably be like on the spectrum or neurodiverse because he was very thorough and um, painstakingly thorough, in fact, including a lot of detail that you really don't have time to to cover in any kind of
Okay.
research or practice. But however, yeah, there's some really great stuff in it. I would suggest that the students that are attracted to this course have some foundational knowledge. For example, like it's essential that for example, the essential dignities and how to basically interpret a general chart first, because there's a lot of yeah defining what significators are and how they perform in a natal chart involved in this course. So
Okay,
yeah, and then
and
when we get to month,
let me ask you,
yeah,
this recommended texts, are those texts the student should have read before the course, or are those texts he should have on his desk during the course, or are those texts he should dive into after the course? What's your
I I think after, because in the course I've provided reading material and practical exercises. I'm very much based in and rooted in the practice.
Okay.
Like theory is great, but I really want students to kind of leave with some first steps on and how to basically approach the chart, with some level of confidence. Obviously, you're
Okay.
not going to be fully confident until you
Okay.
have more
So
practice.
what you're saying is,
So
if somebody has in Kepler College gone through 101, 102, or 103, and is now taking this course, he is well prepared.
yeah, I feel so. At least that person who's done this course will be very much aware of some of the languaging and the techniques of the ancient traditions in terms of interpreting predictive work,
Okay.
uh, which I think is a very good foundational basis. And if they want to dive in further, then they can, get the text and do their own research, because obviously we cannot cover that whole text in a 5-week course. But
That is
I'd
right.
be
Now
interested.
let's come to the course itself. Okay, I would book this course online. It's an online course. You stay in Australia. You're not going to Washington and Seattle. You stay in Guildford, and you're doing a Zoom online long distance course. Correct?
Yes, that's right. Most of the
Now
courses are
let,
run.
let's walk us through the details. I book this course. What will I hear from you in the first step?
The first week is a bit of history.
No, wait a minute.
Ha-
Wait a minute. Now you're already in the course. Now, what for the viewers? And I'm a Virgo +100. Okay, I book the course. I pay the money. What happens next? I get a confirmation, and then
oh,
you open a Zoom conference room for me, or what happens next? Or do you send me PDFs first to read? Do I have to read something before the first session is? Or do we have a Zoom conference with the other students to make a sort of greeting situation? How does the course work? How is the details of what's going on, the procedural?
Oh, I gotcha. Well, luckily for me, I have a lot of support in Kepler College, and they have a whole academic platform set up that is quite automated. So you book the course. There is an online system. I think it's called Moodle. I think it's what all the academic universities kind of are based on. And you can go through each week. You have your own profile on there. There is, the material and the quizzes and the coursework sort of laid out in front of you. If you're conscientious, you can go through it, but I think most people just kind of take it week by week. You get the link as well to enter into the room, like when we have our meeting or our first class, and off we go. And then there is a student forum as well, where I'm available during that 5 weeks to be able to answer questions and discuss, aspects of your chart that you've, looked into over the 5 weeks.
Okay, that means it is sort of a hybrid. You have to be present during those 5 weeks on certain days to participate in the Zoom activities, right?
Well, the recordings are available for, I believe, 3 years after the course. So, there are some students that, pay for the course, but they do it, a year later, or, when they've got the
Ah,
time, because all the resources stay on there. And,
okay,
there's a lot of resources because I add in all the reading material, all the
okay, okay,
exercises.
okay.
Yeah, I guess what you don't get after the 5 weeks is my personal, question and answers.
Yeah, basically you're saying the best idea would be to reserve the time and date for the actual Zoom meeting and the student Zoom meeting if you want to have the full benefit of the course. But if you just pay the price and don't want to participate in any discussions, you are sufficient. You're content to watch it later. That is a possibility as well, and then you only have no possibility to ask direct questions during the session. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Live is always best, and
Okay.
failing that, yeah, the recordings. But the best is live and recordings, so you can review and do the
Yes.
course,
Yes.
whole course again.
Okay.
And three
So
years is a very generous time to be able to have a recording. So
okay.
yeah, Kepler College are a really great value with their
Okay.
courses. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to add something for the course, or can we jump back to Malaysia?
Um, um, I don't think there's anything else to add. Yeah, apart from the fact that I think the link is in your talk site, and it's starting soon, so it's probably best to jump on
Yeah,
and book.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
before
link
too
for the
late.
course where you can book it is on my special site I showed before. We come back to that site later so that people can see the site again. So now, Malaysia. When were you born?
Born in the early 80s in Malaysia,
Okay.
and
Okay. So you are in Malaysia. Your family is Chinese or Korean or Vietnamese? What is your family from?
Chinese
Okay.
predominantly, but there's an interesting story to that because, well, I'm not sure how much you know of Malaysia, but it is a melting pot of
It,
many
I have
cultures.
I've watched some videos for preparation for today. There was a lot of European states colonizing Malaysia, and and before the colonization of the European powers, there was a lot of going on of Chinese people coming down to these islands, and then other
Mm.
people coming down there, and a lot of kings and queens and other ruling powers. And then the European powers, I think the Portuguese were the first who dominated in
Uh,
Malaysia. Is that right?
I think that was the Dutch or Portuguese. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think it.
it doesn't
Yeah,
matter. It's
it's
a
a long
lot.
time ago,
It's a lot
not
of.
before my time.
It's a lot. It was in the 17th century, I believe. So it's a lot of influence since then. And you are living there in 1980s, born there. How many siblings?
Just my sister and I. So my mother was from the Chinese descendants that were there from the 1400s. You know, like they were Chinese, but they became their own ethnic group.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
Nyonya, they're called the Nyonyas. I'm not sure if you came across that from in your research. So they'd been there for all eternity, essentially. However, they're still considered not local. They were still considered. So we were very much like you know, in astrology speak, like an exiled,
Okay.
culture.
And
Detriment. We were never belonged.
that was your mother's side.
Yes, my mother's side. My father's side were actually from mainland China, but they were quite wealthy there. My great grandfather had three wives. They all had bound feet and 16 children. So they were wealthy. But there was a war. I think it was the Korean War in the late night, 1800s, and they were exiled from China. So he
Okay.
took his whole family, uh, just the first wife and the 10 children. So he left the concubines and the remaining six children in China.
Okay.
And that's how we all came to be in Malaysia from my father's side. So they're much more closer connected to mainland China than my mother's side were.
And your father was a Taoist, in German,
Mm,
Tao philosophy. Taoist of Lao Tzu, right?
Taoist, yes. What is his
Lao
Lao
Tzu.
Tzu? Yeah, right.
Lao
Yeah,
Tzu.
yeah.
And in one video you mentioned that he was an esoteric Taoist. You didn't elaborate what you meant with that. What do you mean with an esoteric Taoist?
Yeah, I guess it was their sect, I guess, for want of a better word, was very much about um, underworld, the worship of underworld deities for
Okay,
self-cultivation, right?
okay, okay,
So,
okay,
when I visited his temple, there was a lot of nodal action happening, lots of snakes and cobras in their iconography. The main deity of the temple was a black-faced god, who was invoked every week, 3 times a week by the priest. So the priest would channel that deity, and very mundanely, like going to the deli and getting a ticket to be served. You go in and get your ticket to then talk to a priest that was channeling this deity. His
okay.
name was what was his what was his Huat Chukong. So that was the
Okay.
sect that Yeah.
And
And
your
they
mother,
would
and
do.
then we don't want to go too much into the esotericism aspect of your father. Let's hear about your mother before we go to you as a person. Your mother wasn't so happy with that, right?
Oh, I think she was from a very different upbringing where they were city people. They didn't really have much religion going on in their lives. You know, they had been raised by nuns, and the whole
Oh, okay.
Western kind of
So
materialism had sort of
there
crept
was
in.
a sort of clash of culture when they married.
Yes, I mean, she didn't speak the language. They spoke
Uh,
a different language altogether. One was Hokkien and she spoke Cantonese. So she
okay,
had to learn to speak the other dialect to be able to
okay,
communicate. And so even now, I don't really understand the Hokkien language very much
okay.
at all. We didn't spend much time,
So
down there. Mm.
so the catastrophe happened and your father died when you were 4, and then we have 3 years before your mother with you and your sister, I suppose, moved to Australia. What happened after your father died in those 3 years? What did your mother do? How did she keep you up? How did she earn money? What was that like in those 3 years?
Yeah, well, I guess the difference between living in a place like Malaysia and living in a Western sort of culture here is that there was much more community. So she went back home to where she came from, and there was a lot of family around. I grew up, those were the years I really remembered because before 4, you're quite young and you don't remember much, but I just remember there always being people at the house, and I never ever went to sleep in quietness. There was always chattering and people dropping in every Saturday night. I mean, even it happens now. Like everyone gets together and goes out for dinner. Like it doesn't matter who you are. Like we all band together. So there was that community, and
Okay.
I guess that's how she survived. And she just put herself through school and got herself a permanent residency. She worked really hard and migrated here alone as a single mother. So she did really well. She had some support, but
How does that work? The Australian immigration laws are not that easy, I believe.
no, I
Can you
think it was
can
much
you
easier back then. Much
what
easier back
yeah,
then, I
but
think.
can you walk us through? She was living in that community after your father died, so the family was safe. There was no real economic problem for you and your mother. And what did she do in Malaysia to get to Australia?
Well, she did have some skills. I mean, she was a nurse and a secretary in England. So back in those days, women either became nurses or secretaries, and she tried both. And they were from a fairly not wealthy, like they wasn't a struggling family, so they were able to afford to expatriate her during her studying years to have some time in England, as they all did, and hence why all the families sort of scattered all over the world, really. But yeah, so she did have some skills, but I think based on the Australian immigration laws at the time, I think she found it easier to brush up her secretarial skills and bring herself over. And then, of course, you need sponsors. We already had an aunt and some family here who then sponsored her to come over. And I
Okay.
think it was much easier back then. I think it's much tougher now, and you need to have
Okay.
a lot more
Okay.
capital behind you.
Okay. Now, where did you move? Did your mother take you and your sister to Guildford right away, or did you start in Melbourne?
Yeah, we went to Melbourne. She's still in Melbourne. My sister's still in Melbourne. I'm the one that had to get out of the city. And, I think
Okay.
it's also getting back to my roots because my father's family were all from the country, and they
Okay.
were all when they came to Malaysia, they
Yeah.
were working as rubber tappers, working on
Okay.
plantations. And in
Okay.
fact, that's what I've done here. I've grown a
Okay.
forest.
So now you are with your sister and your mother in Melbourne. Your mother is working as a secretary. Did you go to school in Melbourne?
Yes, I did. I went
So,
to primary
so
school and
walk us through the educational system of Australia because you're far away from Germany. And is it like the English educational system or has it its own structure?
um I don't know the English system actually because I've never been there, but I think it was pretty standard. I mean, starts with a preliminary year for 5-year-olds, and then it goes from grade 1 to grade 6. That's primary school, and then you end up in high school, which is year 7 to year 12. And then you can choose whether you want to go into university or vocational, education and take up a trade, or it's depending on what your ambitions are at that
Okay.
stage. So.
Okay, so now you are in school, and now we're getting closer to what we are talking today about, which is astrology and mystic and magic and theology. So you are in school. Do you remember the first time you heard either about astrology or about magic or about any other esoteric discipline like tarot? When did you got infected?
Well, it's funny. I think was about 8, I think, when I sort of begged mum to buy me a book that I saw at a newsagent's. It was just one of those, sun signs for the year for your particular
Okay,
zodiac sign.
okay.
I just saw it and it captivated me. So that was like an early kind of interest, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. But I remember being at high school, and I must have known about astrology in some regard because I went to the school library, which is not very diverse, being a high school library. And I remember actually looking up books on astrology. So I think I would have been about 12 at the time, 12 or 13. And there was one book that was a very basic book that covered pretty much all the signs and details. And I remember I borrowed and renewed that book over and over again. I practically had it on my shelf all year because nobody else needed it. So, and that's how I really, started to know signs. And that's how I still to this day remember people from my high school by their star signs. And like, I might not remember who they are really, but I know that what their star signs were because I kept asking everyone where their star sign, when they were born. But on one visit back to Malaysia, I think it was about my 14th year, I was looking at the house, the house where I was living in Malaysia because my grandfather hadn't died yet. And I came across some of my father's books. And one of those books was a Chinese astrology book. So, and I've still got that today, and it remains one of my only possessions of his, like till this day. So
Okay.
that was I thought that was a very special find. It was something that sort of just came to me, and I'm really grateful for that.
Okay. Now, during your high school time till you graduate, was there any other esoteric discipline you got into or got infected by, or was the astrology the only esoteric field?
Well, a babysitter that we had, so my mum employed a babysitter to take us to school every morning because she had to go to work. Um, it was an older lady, and she was for most of my primary school. Actually, yeah, this was primary school, not so much high school. So this is before primary school. She was a tarot reader
Ah,
and
okay.
a professional tarot reader. Not that I knew this at the time. So she never told me until when I was about, 14, 15. I took myself to one of these body, mind, spirit festivals or one of these spiritual festivals, just, for something to do. And I saw her there reading cards.
Oh,
And,
she had a booth on on the fair. Okay.
yeah, she still reads cards today. Like
Okay.
she's quite a good card reader, and so that's when we started a whole new relationship together. Like not the babysitter, but more at the level of like
Yeah,
sharing
okay.
occult knowledge. She was more from the modern school, Like I've come to sort of. She taught me a little bit of the tarot, based on how she used it. But she was an older lady, and she would have been from very much that modern movements, the spiritualist movement, like the
Yes,
Blavatsky kind of
yes, yes.
movement. So, yeah, so I kind of, yeah, started off, that was my kind of gateway, I feel, into this whole world,
Did you
even though there were.
did you get yourself a card deck? Do you own tarot cards?
I've never really gotten into the tarot that much, just
Oh, okay.
because I
Okay.
I just don't feel they resonate with me
Okay.
as
Okay.
much, and
No,
because
no problem. Okay.
I, yeah, yeah,
How
I
about
feel astrological symbols speak louder to me.
Okay, how about other esoteric fields? Anything you practiced or learned, or is then tarot and astrology basically your esoteric terrain and basically astrology?
Well, I was also involved in a spiritualist mediumship circle for 10 years. So from the
Ah,
ages, yeah, from the
okay.
ages of about 18 to about, yeah, nearly 30
So
actually.
you participated in seances.
Yes, I did, and
How
trained
was
in mediumship.
how was your experience? How valid is the practice of what you experienced, and how do you see this scene as a whole?
Um, well, I was lucky to have a really great teacher who I respected a lot, but I didn't resonate with a lot of the other teachers, to be
Okay,
honest. But
okay,
in because we sat in this circle for so long, and she had a very good seance room, because a lot of the other circles, a lot of them didn't have a seance room. They would just do kind of, proof of survival type work, and going into, their own channeling, and trying to make a connection there. But my teacher had a dedicated, purpose built room building at the back of her property where that's all she did. And she had brought out a lot of great seance mediums from England. She was English. So to run seances there. So that was my entree into real phenomena. Like, I'm talking crazy stuff where there was one time there was a little girl in spirit that had come through, and she was going around to everyone, touching our clothes, and then when the session had finished, the lights were on, we found all our jewelry was hung up on the rafters. Like,
okay.
even bangles that had no
So
openings.
you had a real paranormal experience.
Yeah, so we had a lot of paranormal experiences in
Okay.
that room. And
Okay,
so
In Germany, we have a special university institute in Freiburg, the Bender Institute for the viewers. If the viewers want to go dive into that aspect of Schu's life, go to the homepage of the Bender Institute in Freiburg in Germany. I don't know whether there is any other university institution like that in the world, but how long, from what age to what age did you participate in this sort of activity?
from about 18 to about nearly 30.
Okay, and that has a reason why you don't do it anymore.
Well, I moved. That was one reason, but I kind of fell away from it because I just didn't like just going in and seeing who was there. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I felt it was too unstructured for me and
Okay,
left me quite
okay,
open. I know we all, have to train to find our own, personal guides and
okay,
all that kind of thing. But I kind of felt like it was kind of moving into not not dangerous territory, but you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah, okay,
I kind of felt it a little bit invasive in some instances, or like, what's the point of actually doing this? And so, and all in parallel to that, I had been studying astrology
yeah,
at the
no,
same time.
because
And
from when you were 19, which is the same period, you are already
yeah,
into it. We come to astrology in a second. Now, basically, did you read books like Aleister Crowley's books or other books accompanying your experience with Spiritism? Or was that just
um,
practical?
in fact, I got more into the ceremonial traditions a bit later,
Okay.
because the spiritualist movement was more based on, the earlier modern, like I mean, the later modern sort of works, the Blavatsky sort of era.
Yeah, yeah.
So there was less kind of orthodox kind of practices. It was very
Okay.
kind of new age, if you know what
Okay.
I mean.
Yeah,
And
yeah, okay.
I had developed kind of, and I mean, if you know my chart, I'm just, that doesn't really Yeah, I'm very Saturnian, so
Okay.
I kind of was looking for more tradition and lineage.
Okay. In that time, any connections to the Wicca movement, the witches and people like that?
No?
Uh,
Sorry, you
to
just cut out.
any connections to the Wicca movement?
No. Oh,
No.
the
Okay.
Wicca. Yeah,
Yeah.
Wicca. Oh yeah. I mean, I always dabbled and but that has always kind of been in the background with me. But it's yeah, definitely much stronger as I moved more into yeah, when I got into more traditional astrology. Yes.
Okay. So now we come
Yeah.
to astrology. You are still in high school, and then you mentioned in the video of Todd Hermes that when the nodal axis return happened, an angel sat on your shoulder and whispered to you, "You have to learn astrology." Was it like that?
In a way, I mean, I woke up and with that sense, that message of I had to learn astrology. I still do that today. In fact, my peak times are around 4 to 5 in the morning, and I have very strong messages that come through to me at that time, and now I actually just get up at that time,
Okay.
so I can actually do something about it. But yes, I did wake up with that very strong message of you must learn astrology.
Okay. Now you have a task. You live in Melbourne. Do you go to the yellow pages in those days and look up astrology and then phone them up, or what did you do?
Well, I actually rang my old babysitter. She was like my connection into that sort of world. And I asked her if she knew of any astrologers. And so she gave me a name of an astrologer, and I rang her. And she said, "Oh, you don't need an astrology teacher. You just need to go to the Theosophical Bookshop and get Robert Hand's book." Right.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
off I went. I took a train into the city and I found Robert Hand's book and I flicked through it and I thought, this just looks way too complicated because there was, calculations involved and things like that. I thought I really need some guidance. And then I looked just around the corner and there was a tiny little notice stuck on the inside of the bookshelf of a teacher who ran the Melbourne Astrology School. And so that's where I started. And that's, yeah, and
Okay.
Sean McNamara is the teacher, and was a fantastic astrologer.
So this is a school with he has his own rooms for teaching his pupils, or was it in a sitting room situation where he was
I
teaching?
think I think when I had started with him, he had moved away from a hired space to his own lounge room kind of space. Yes, so
So
he had
it was a sort of he was in his apartment or home or house. Did he have a house?
yes, yep,
So in
yep.
his private house, he had a separate room dedicated for teaching people.
That's quite right.
How many people were sitting around you when there was a course?
Quite a few, I thought, I think there was at least about
Ah,
15-ish
okay.
plus, like
Okay,
quite a lot.
For the German viewer, that reminds us of the esoteric activities of Torvald Detlefsen. He started his career as a well-known esotericist in Munich, in his living room with 15 people, like Shu Yap is telling us. So 15 people sitting there, and what was he doing? What books did he recommend to read, and how was his course structured?
Well, it was a 2-year course and it was a psychologically based astrological course. We It was fundamentals, so learning about the signs, the planets, and the houses essentially, and then ending with a little bit of predictive, like simple predictive work like transits. And I think he covered secondary progressions. And he had his own technique actually for secondary progressions, which um, was quite interesting. Instead of using the beginning of the year as the 1st of January, in these calculations, he would use the beginning of the Aries season.
Okay.
Uh, so yes, and he made his own program for it and everything. It never kind of took off, but I really admire his,
Okay. So you have
dedication towards that.
2 years of education. What books were you demanded to read parallel to the courses?
A lot of, Liz Green, Stephen
Okay,
Arroyo,
okay, okay.
Vanessa George.
Den Radja?
Roger, yes, and then a lot of the Greek myths, because he used the myths as a teaching tool for all of the planets
Okay,
and signs as well. So
okay.
it's a very standard kind of modern day psychologically based practice.
So that is now when we are middle of 1980s born. Now we are now in the middle of 2000s, right?
Yeah, early 2000s.
Early
Yes.
2000. You finished the course. Did you get a certificate? Or did you have an exam or
Um,
something like that?
there was no exam, but we were able to go to the VAA to take an exam if we wanted to. I never really got to the exams. I should probably do it one of these days, but see, he got very sick, and I do have a trend of my teachers all becoming very sick.
Okay,
I've had one die on me and another
okay,
one being too sick. This is having both malefics and Pluto in the ninth house. So I'm very
okay.
cautious about what teachers I take on
When you talk
because I
about
don't want to hurt them.
Yeah, when you talk about exams, a VAA, is that something for an astrological association? What does it stand for,
Yes.
the VAA? What's its full
Victorian
Victoria
Astrological
Associate?
Association.
So
Yes,
you are indicating that in Australia, the states like Victoria or New Wales or West Australia, do they all have their own astrological
exam.
and
Oh, no, actually, FAA, the federal. So I was part of the VAA, but the VAA and all the states were part of the FAA, which is the Federal Astrologers Conference, Association.
association?
Yeah, and so every 2 years they run a conference where the whole country comes together and has a international conference. I think there's
Okay.
going to be one in January 2025, I think. So that'll be exciting. First one since COVID.
And what would you guess? How many people are members of the FAA of all of Australia? 5,000 astrologers, 50,000 astrologers.
Oh,
What would you guess?
Probably closer to the 5,000 mark. I wouldn't say there were 50. That'd be great if there was, but I don't really have much to do with them, so
No,
I really have no idea.
just to get an impression. And how many astrologers would you guess are in Victoria?
Not a lot of professional astrologers or
No,
just
but members of the VAA.
right. I think there would be no more than 1,000. I think
That's a
maybe
well to
500
Well,
to
okay. In one
I don't know.
video, in one video, with somebody from Melbourne, and he was saying about Melbourne, it's a small town with 5 million people. Well, that's not a small town. 5 million people alone in Melbourne or more, and 1,000 astrologers in Victoria. The whole German Astrological Association, der Deutsche Astrologenverband, is around 1,000, and we are 82 million people. So,
Oh, okay. Maybe
so
my figures are wrong.
no, I think
But
your figures might be right because it might be a different cultural approach because you have many people who accept astrology. Astrology might not be so hot disputed like in my country. So
mhm.
1,000 in Victoria sounds interesting. How do you meet your colleague astrologers? Do you meet them at all, or do you have Zoom conferences with colleagues of VAA, or do they have when the lockdown was, were there Zoom conferences? What is the VAA doing with you and you with them?
Right. Well, the VAA meets monthly and they have a speaker once a month for quite a long lecture, like a 3 hour kind of lecture, and then a afternoon tea afterwards. So I am presenting the February the lecture on the topic is remediating the solar return chart. So
So
that's what I'm
you're confronting Australian people with magic.
Oh, well, it's not necessarily magic. I haven't fully planned out the talk yet, but I want to explore different forms of remediation from different cultures and looking at the Western lineage that's been very broken and how we can sort of contribute to all of that based on our experiences and our culture. And so, yeah, it's more of a discussion around what can we do when we see something in a temporary chart. As a
You are evading the question. If you are remediating, you are talking with the gods to change fate, right?
Well, yes, not everyone would I personally do, but not everyone does. I think there's different forms of spirit and God communication.
I agree, but
Uh,
if you use the term remediating,
mm.
we are
Yes, it's
talking
quite
about
controversial.
an
Mm.
approach which has as a philosophical background that there is something in the horoscope and there are techniques where you can bargain how they manifest themselves. Is that correct?
I would propose that. Yes, I would
Yeah, okay.
propose that some things you can change and some things you
So
can't.
basically, in February, this might be an interesting setting because there will be people who are quite materialistic and quite
Yes,
agnostic. And
and quite modern. Mm.
what do we expect? An uproar and you get thrown out of the room, or an interesting discussion? What do you expect?
Well, that was my next point, is that I actually don't have much to do with associations and the networking aspect. I must say I am a bit of a hermit, and so it takes a lot for me to actually get out and connect with people. So, like, yeah, and I'm working on that. I'm trying to sort of be more like less shy and like get out of my hermit's cave and get out in the world. And I find I'm quite busy just with my work with Kepler, and I do have like contacts and colleagues overseas that I'm in discussions with. So I tend to work on my little projects solo, and partly it's also because I've generally been, apart from doing some courses, with the Melbourne School of Astrology, with the School of Traditional Astrology, and going to conferences and things like that, I have very much been a solitary sort of student, a solitary scholar, where I would prefer to get a text, read it, and then contact the author for a private session. That tends to
Okay.
be what
Yeah.
I like to do.
So let's jump back. We have now a little impression of what's going on in Victoria with astrology, and quite an interesting session in February for people to watch whether Shu is still alive in March. Let's get back. You finished your education in psychological astrology with your teacher. Did you, in that time of the courses or shortly after the first education in astrology, attend any conferences in Australia and England or America? What happened with your getting out and see other astrologers? Did you do that or?
Yeah. Yes, I have. That's one thing I did force myself to do, was to go to the biannual, as in every 2-year conferences that the FAA held, and that's where my world really opened up, because that's how I got into traditional astrology. In fact, I went to a lecture by Ben Dykes, and
When
I've been
when when
following.
when was that?
I think around 2008 or 2007,
Okay,
perhaps,
so
like
that's
around
quite
that time.
after you finish your astrology course. Now, during your astrology course with your teacher, did she mention Project Hindsight at all?
No,
Or he? It was
not
a he. It
no.
was a he. Sorry, it was a
He,
he. Yeah.
yes, no, but he was definitely well aware of Rob Hand and
Oh,
Rob
okay.
Zoller, but he never got into the Project Hindsight stuff.
Okay.
Which in hindsight, I thought, yeah, that was rather disappointing, because I could have
Yeah.
fast tracked,
Yeah. Yeah.
my knowledge systems a lot more, but
Okay.
instead I had to really drop everything and start again.
Before we go on with your astrological career, you are 19 starting, or something 18, 19 years old, starting with this course with your teacher. But that is also the time when the decision is on the table what you do after high school. Now, before we go on with the astrology track, what happened in your professional life after high school? Did you go to university? Did you learn a vocational thing, or what happened there?
Yes, I did a double degree in Japanese language and culture, and
Okay.
business communications
Okay.
marketing. So I just did Japanese because I had done French in high school and lived in France for a little bit and loved learning a language. And I just wanted to learn another language just for fun, really. And Yeah, then I worked as in communications and PR
Did you
for
did you get a
15 years.
BA? Did you get a BA, a Bachelor of Arts in this Japanese language
I
education?
did. I did, and don't ask me to speak Japanese now because I have
Oh,
no
that's
idea.
okay. How about a master? How about a master's degree? Did you do that?
I only got to the bachelor's.
Okay,
I
okay,
really didn't enjoy it at all. And
okay.
I did my course, got a job, and,
Now that
had a
is,
bit of fun in the job.
yeah, but how did you get it? Okay, you have your bachelor certificate. I am now a Bachelor of Arts in Japanese language and something else, I suppose. Now, how do you find a job in Melbourne in those days? What happened? What did you do?
Well, most people when they finish university in a degree like business, for example, there's a lot of internships that you can apply for. So I managed to get into a small little sole contract sort of business in community development, and that's how I really got interested and to know these country communities because I would be out doing community development work in regional Victoria, and
And
now
what
I live in
what
regional
what do you do when you develop a community? What do you do? What was your job doing developing a community? You go out to the community and tell the mayor you should do that and you should not do this?
Well, my boss, his clients were the shire councils, and they would engage him to be able to um, do community development plans. So, like, how do we make this community more cohesive or more vibrant? So we would look at getting grants for like running various festivals or
When
helping out farmers
when
from
when
an
you
economic.
when you say community, do you mean indigenous people like Aborigines?
No, they were country community. Not many indigenous people that in these regions. That's
Okay,
further up north. Although there are some,
okay.
um,
So it's just
but
a normal town or village, basically,
yes,
with
yeah, because
white and
white
yellow and brown
white
people.
Australians.
Yeah, okay.
Mainly white. It was weird
Ah,
seeing
okay.
me walking. Everyone
Oh,
used to think I was his mail order bride, walking through
okay.
town.
Okay. Now,
But
how do I have imagine you go out, you're in this company who is doing this sort of advisory work. That's correct.
yes, well, he was, and I was doing the groundwork. I'd be writing media releases to all the local newspapers and radio stations saying this is on. I'd be trying to get people to come to these events. I would be yeah, a lot of event management stuff, like getting
Is
and
it
then
is
following
it
up.
basically a cultural approach, or is it basically a business approach to attract businesses to the community, or to get more networking in cultural affairs inside the community?
Both. We had different plans for the industrial sector and the community sector. So some of it involved youth, and some, involving,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, general community, and then others. Another leg of it was like the business industry sort
And
of
that
sector.
started in 2004 or something?
Yeah, that's right. I think that was my first kind of grown-up job.
Okay, yeah,
I
okay.
had wanted to be a journalist. That was my
Okay.
initial
Okay.
ambition, to be a journalist, to be a war correspondent.
Yeah, okay.
my
Okay.
my little Aries moon there. And then I ended up after this job working in PR, public relations, where I did media management, media liaison,
For
wrote
what
a lot of
sort
articles.
for what sort of company?
I've worked several companies, but the one that I had the longest gig at was for Siemens,
Oh, German
the German company.
German company. Well,
Siemens.
an
Yeah.
international company which has been German a couple of decades ago. Let's put it this way.
Yeah. So I
Uh,
used to have to come to Munich a fair bit. Yes.
did you visit Germany by that job?
Yes, our head office was in Munich, the
Yes,
communications
I have
department.
been.
Yeah.
I have been. I when I was with the Ministry of Economics in Lower Saxony, I had a connection with the Siemens company in Munich, and I had a nice colleague. We were talking about a project in Lower Saxony. So you have been to this wonderful headquarters with all those very stylish floors and all that, and the high offices. Okay.
It's very I've been to the Christmas markets
Yeah.
there and
Okay.
all. Yeah, I
Okay.
had a great time. I had my first sort of like white Christmas business there, which was nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was the speechwriter for the CEO in Australia, and I used to
Okay.
do all of his media work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What was your experience when how long have you been in Munich in that trip? How many days?
Oh, it was always for business. So I was only ever there, maximum, say
Oh,
2 weeks, but had
okay.
to work. Yeah, I unfortunately didn't have much time to get out and
And see the
see the
country.
place,
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay. So you're in PR for Siemens and other companies. Let's guess $100,000 as a yearly salary or less.
Yeah, US dollars.
Yeah,
I think it was.
I don't know the Australian currency, how it's worth, so that's why.
I think it would have been less in Aussie dollars. It was about the 100 in the Aussie
And
dollar.
how is the exchange rate for Australian dollars to US dollars?
I think it's about 1.5 US dollars. No, back then, gosh, I don't
Uh,
know. I
Take
never didn't
take
work
take
in
take
US
take
dollars
take
much.
take today's exchange rate. You have clients from all over the world. You might have clients from your states. What is $100 Australian worth in US dollars?
I think US dollars is worth about $50 or $60 to the 100 of Australian. I think that's about the
Uh,
conversion.
so it's like the Canadian dollar, a little bit. Okay, okay, just to get an impression. Okay, the reason why I was asking this, when did you find out that you don't want to earn this good money anymore?
Well, I was still working as an astrologer through that time. I led a double life. So I
Yeah.
never told anyone.
Okay.
Um, and because it was, for me, I just had to do it. I've always called it a moral obligation. It was a non-negotiable. I had to do my astrological work.
Okay.
And uh,
But
you know,
you could have stayed on the job and still do astrology, or you could have gotten yourself a half-time job and stayed in Melbourne, but you didn't do that.
no, I didn't do that. Part of it is that I had children as well. So I took not long service leave, maternity leave, and I took the longest that I could get.
How
And
many children do
then
you have?
I have 3 children,
Sure.
3 boys.
So that's quite an amount of time because you get 1 year for each children at least, right?
And we could extend, and I kept extending it and extending, and but in that time I had also gone into my own consultancy, not in astrology, but I was doing astrology, but my I started to become a freelance writer
Okay.
for pretty much the same contacts that I had at work. I would started working as a freelancer for some of the external agencies that worked for us. I
Was
started
that
working for them.
was that allowed in your maternity leave that you do this
Um,
sort of work?
oh, look, I didn't do much in the maternity leave, but when I had kind of decided I wasn't going to go back after 2 lots of maternity leave, I
Okay.
started contracting and doing freelance.
When was that?
I think I had my second child. I had my second child, and we were already living up here in Guildford, which meant the travel was going to be ridiculous. And they still were
Ah,
very, even though we could work from home, it wasn't the culture back then. They wanted you
but
to be in the office.
now we have jumped over some very important decision to leave Melbourne and start not a farm, but something else in Guildford. How did that
Yeah.
come about? How did you find the place to where did you buy the place or do you rent it?
Well, how it happened was Uranus went over my moon three
Okay.
times. And in
Okay.
that 3 times over the year, we had been on a holiday here actually and came across this property. We weren't looking for property, and we um, somehow, I don't know why we were looking at property. We found this one and I really liked it. And I thought, well, this is a very unusual size because either properties were 5 or 6 acres or 600 acres, but this is an 80-acre property. And I thought it was a really lovely size. You get the feeling of that expansiveness, not being able to see your neighbors, and having the space to be able to do like have a commercial cottage industry if you'd like, yet it wasn't too unmanageable. So I said, we should consider getting this block. And we had always wanted to one day live in the country, but it was one of these pie in the sky, idealistic
Okay.
thoughts.
Now we have to find out who is the we. Is that your husband and you? So
Yes.
you're a married couple, 3 children. Where and how did you meet your husband?
Well, actually, we hadn't had children at the time, so we
Okay.
brought this block along. Even when I was working in a commercial sense,
Okay.
we were coming up here for weekends.
So how
Yeah,
did your husband come around the corner? When did you meet him?
I met him in my early 20s.
That would be
Yes,
2004, something like that.
around about that time,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
we met, and it's been a long time now. Yeah, 20 years or so,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
yeah,
And
went to go.
what profession is he in? What's his
He
professional
work.
background?
He's an electrician. He works as a signal technician for the railways.
So he's basically very grounded, very earthy.
Ah, I would say I'm more earthy. He works in a very potentially high stress environment. He's working with infrastructure. There could be suicides, like high risk. Working on the train lines. There's a lot that's going on.
How did he
And
react? How did you how did he find out about your magical astrological background? And how did he
uh,
react?
from the beginning, he's a Catholic, so we do have some very
You have quite
um,
some discussions going on if he's a strong Catholic believer.
well, he's not I wouldn't call him a religious Catholic. I would call him a cultural Catholic.
Okay. But
Um,
still, if he's talking, if he go to the sermon in the church, does he attend church
no,
mass?
he
Oh,
does.
he doesn't go.
No, he doesn't.
Okay, how about his friend circle? He meets you, he presents you, the magical astrologer, to his friends. How did that go around? Did
Well,
he tell his friends what you are doing?
no, I mean, I didn't really make a big deal about what I did. It was always done in
Uh,
secrecy,
okay,
you know.
okay.
Lot of heavy 12th house emphasis in my chart. And, I did lead a double life, like I truly did.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
so, really, from the beginning, from my first nodal return to my second nodal return, I had lived a double life. And I think when I got to my second nodal return, I was exhausted of living this double life. And I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to just come out
tell
and
the world
live.
I'm an astrologer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have been one for a long time.
And how did your okay, when that happened, you were already in Guildford, right?
Yes, I
And
was.
Guildford is 200 people, so the uproar couldn't be that much, right?
Well, Guildford's main sort of town, which is 10 minutes away, is Castlemaine, and that's, I think, 5,000. So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm known as the local astrologer now. But, and if you had have said that to me 10 years ago, to be that person, I would have died. I think I
Okay.
do have probably past life trauma or of the witch trials or
Okay. Okay.
something, because
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
it was very real.
So when you were 38, second nodal return, the community 5,000 plus 200 people. How many people of that conglomeration of people do you really know? How many people do you have in your inner circle?
Oh, well, again, I'm a bit of a hermit. I mean, I know a lot of people, but they're not necessarily in my inner circle. I think
How,
a lot of people, more people know me than I know them, just because of,
okay.
the work that I do now
You
and
are the witch from
speaking.
you are the witch astrologer of Guildford, okay? Uh,
But there are many witches and alternative people here. So in that regard, I feel safe here.
that was my next
Um,
question. How is this rural area? How many astrologers, how many witches, how many magicians are located in your neighborhood? You
I
guess.
don't know how many, but people are very open here.
Okay.
And there's a very strong connection to indigenous cultures and the indigenous customs. So
Okay.
not so different to the way I guess I work
Yeah.
animistically with
Yeah. Okay.
my own practices. So
Okay.
yeah, it's a safe place to come out, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
Or yeah.
Okay. So basically, you are in a protected area. Nobody is hunting you down because you are this witch which has to be burned on the stake. So it's nice for you to live there. How about the indigenous people? Do they have a sort of astrology?
I think it's more cosmology, I think, and I'm not sure. It's really hard for me to find more information about Indigenous cosmology. I know there is actually a university course now that you can do in RMIT in Melbourne on Indigenous cosmology. They, from my understanding, work a lot more with fixed stars and the constellations,
Okay.
um, and just the star stories that come from that, and
Okay.
the telling of the seasons. For example, the Milky Way is considered to be the emu, and as it rotates around the skies, when that emu lays low, that's when the indigenous cultures will start looking for emu eggs
Okay. Okay.
to eat. So
Okay.
they use the
Yeah.
sky as
Yes.
that calendric system, but it was
Okay.
very pictorial and story based,
Okay.
and it was all based on their hunting systems and their agricultural
Okay.
nomadic systems.
When I watched this Guildford Walking Heritage film, which showed your landscape, um, the guy at the beginning of the movie did something you did yourself also. He thanked the people who owned the land. There seems to be an Australian approach, could be a woke approach or a new political approach. It seems to me that there is sort of an obligation to thank the indigenous people before you start anything else in a movie like this one. What's that background? What's happening in Australia with this problem?
Yeah, well, there is what we call a welcome to country that's done now at all official engagements. Not necessarily government engagements, but even, if I ran a community party here, I would be able to contact an Indigenous elder to possibly run a welcome to country where there's a smoking ceremony and everyone has to be smoked and blessed and to cleanse
Why is that?
themselves.
Why? Because they owned the country 500 years ago?
It was just a custom that the Indigenous people did to cleanse the space and to bring in an
Yeah, no,
intention for the
I agree.
gathering.
I understand that. That is something the indigenous people in their culture did thousands of years ago, probably. Why are white people or yellow
Uh,
people or brown people sort of doing this all the time? Because now
right.
it seems to be something the Australian white people, let's take them for example. Those were two white people doing this walkabout in Guildford. Why did they feel the necessity to do this vogue? Well, they didn't
Yeah.
sense anything. They just talked about it. We
Yeah.
well,
So that was the acknowledgement of the lands that we're on, and I guess this whole movement came around after the Sorry Day um, event that happened when the Prime Minister at the time apologized to the indigenous cultures for all the wrongs that had been
So
done.
basically, what you're saying is the U.S. government stands up, another president,
Australian
not.
government.
No, no,
Australian government.
I want to shove it over to America. That would
Oh,
be comparable if the Congress of America of the United States and the President of the United States would declare we have to be sorry for killing millions of Indians, and from now on, if you do anything, you remember that. Is that something comparable?
I think it was just one of the tools that came up as a way of reconciliation. And part
Okay,
of that is an education to the whole community on some of the practices of
okay.
the indigenous cultures, but also the acknowledgement that this land was the land of the Jaja people that I'm sitting
This
on, and the
this
important
sign
ceremonies.
this sounds very nice, and it sounds that your country is doing something the colonial powers have missed to do up to now. Is that correct?
Yes, that is an attempt. So there's still a long way to go. but it
Okay.
is an attempt to reconcile, some of the wrongs. And it's a
Okay.
very tricky situation. I mean,
It's a very swampy situation. You can drown in that, yeah, very easily.
absolutely. And
Okay.
we've
Okay.
just had this, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah.
We won't dig too much into that because that would take up much of our time. We don't have that. So back to 2008 or something, you met Ben Dykes on the FAA conference, and you were confronted with the situation that he is a guy who translated old text. In that time period, he was in the beginning of his translating career, I suppose. Now there are 20 or something books available in office translations. What happened with you personally? There was a lecture, I suppose. He did a lecture,
Yes, he did a
and
lecture,
what was it
and
sort
I
of
was
an
very
was it
impressed.
was it sort of an epiphany for you?
It was because of I think the lecture was around like assessing relationship charts or something along those lines. I can't even remember,
Yeah, okay.
but I just liked some of the techniques he used to analyze the chart. And I think basically, like, one of the techniques was looking at the part of fortune, um, and planets sort of aspecting 90 degrees or at the cross angles of the part of fortune as
Okay.
indicators of that particular relationship
Oh, we
story.
do, okay, we get the idea. There was an epiphany moment for you, but what happens next? Did you book a course with him? Did you contract him as a mentor via Zoom? Did you have Ben Dykes as a teacher of your own, or did you find other teachers, mentors, or courses or conferences to follow this epiphany?
Well, in that same conference, Demetra George, I think it was the same conference, Demetra George was doing a post-conference workshop
Okay.
on on traditional astrology, like the basics.
Yeah. Okay.
So she introduced to me the concepts of things like whole sign houses, and
She was
basically
she
just
wa- she
using.
was she was at that time at Kepler College teaching Hellenistic astrology, I believe.
I think she might have been still at
Yeah.
that time. I don't know
Yeah.
when she left.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I did that workshop and thought, oh my goodness, like, wow, like, whole signs. Like,
Okay. Okay. I
that was my
understand. I get the idea. What happens next? Did you read 15 books, or did you get yourself a personal teacher and trainer?
I read a lot. And
Okay.
then Chris Brennan was brought out to Melbourne for the first time. And he was an unknown person at that stage, right?
Yes.
And he ran a weekend, he was brought out to run a weekend workshop kind of situation. And I attended right before I went to Munich one time, actually. Because I remember going to that workshop with my bags packed, and after that weekend, I flew straight to Munich.
Okay.
So that was
Okay.
just a funny little. But I remember I bought. He was saying that he has created a Hellenistic astrology course. That's how I learnt about zodiacal releasing, actually,
Yes.
in
Okay.
that workshop. And he had just created a course, his
Okay.
Hellenistic astrology course.
Okay.
And I bought the course, and it only cost me $75. Like, it was just so cheap at the time. But I
That was
bought it
that
main.
was early Chris Brennan. Nowadays we are
It was
we are
early
adding some
Chris Brennan.
zeros behind that 75. Okay.
Yes, he's very famous now, but he was quite unknown at the time.
Okay.
And I bought it just to support him, because I thought, wow, this kid has got so much potential, and
Yes.
he's got so much knowledge, and he just looks like he's just struggling financially. Like, he just looks so thin, and like, he just looked like one of these poor students,
Yeah.
to me. So
Okay.
I thought,
Okay.
now I'm
Okay.
gonna I'm gonna just support him and just buy his course. And
Okay.
to be honest,
Now,
I
now,
haven't.
now, now that was probably before Zoom technology. How was that course
Mm,
structured? How did you do the course? Because you didn't go to Denver,
no,
Colorado, I suppose.
no, he had his course on. He's very technologically savvy. He had some kind of online platform where you can view the courses. But of course, I just moved to the country, and there was terrible internet then when I
Yes.
moved.
Yes, yes.
And I think my internet limit was 4 gigabytes a month.
Okay.
And I remember conversing with him on email, and I said, "Is there any way these classes can be sent out to me on CD? Because I can't actually do these courses." But of course, that's not a possibility because of the copyright issues. And I totally understood that. And I said, so I never have actually done the course in full, but I do use it like a reference book, like when I want to check up on a source and because Chris Brennan is so thorough. And there's so much in there that it's like it's on my bookshelf. Yeah.
Now, when you say you take the course as a reference, this was a digital course he did,
Mm.
and do you have still the rights to go into the course? Is when you book a
Mm.
Chris Brennan course, is it for life?
I think it's for life. I've still got access.
You still got X. So basically, we found your first teacher in traditional astrology with the name of Chris Brennan, questioned in between. Why did he never interview you? You're one of,
Oh,
you're one of his first students.
oh, I think it's probably long forgotten me. But I
Ah,
mean,
ah,
I didn't
okay.
have much interaction because I didn't actually do the course. It was a self-paced course. It wasn't
Oh, okay.
like
Yeah, yeah, okay.
like at Kepler, I'm actually teaching face to face because
Yes.
there's no Zoom.
Yeah, okay.
But we did have some conversations, and he used one of my paintings, in fact, for one of his episodes on the lunar nodes
Oh,
with
okay.
Ronnie Dreyer,
One of
because
one of one of those finished paintings or one of those not yet finished paintings?
none of them are finished. Um, and I'm hoping to finish some this year. But so I had painted as a
You
bit
had
of
started you
therapy.
had started with a certain planetary situation, a painting, and that's the one he used.
Yes, I painted the story of the Samudra Manthan,
Ah,
which
okay.
is the creation story of the eclipses, the Hindu story, where Rahu and Ketu were, identified in those stories, and it's
Okay.
the creation of
Okay.
the Amrita.
Okay.
Yeah, so I painted that during my nodal return as a form of therapy. As I started the painting, my nodal return sort of phase started, and by the time I kind of got to that point of being able to hang it, even though I wasn't happy with the finished form, I had been through that nodal return. So to me, it was a form of therapy,
Okay.
um,
Okay.
as as I contemplated that story and what I was going through, and
Okay.
yeah.
Let's go to another interesting person. Robert Zoller did have a course of medieval astrology. Did you hear about him? Did you buy his course, or did you never hear about him?
Yeah, I didn't do his course, but one lecture that I heard at the VAA, I think this probably would have been before the meeting Chris Brennan.
Yes.
Um, I, I mean Ben Dykes, Cindy Norton, which I saw is she coming on for an
I,
interview
I'm
soon?
I'm in contact with Cindy Norton from Perth, West Australia, and
Yeah.
she hasn't decided when she wants to do it, but she said she wants to do it. It could take a little bit of time. She's not the youngest, and has her daughter moved back to Perth of personal reasons, so they had a lot of stress right in December. So we were waiting to find a date for doing Cindy Norton on this channel.
Right. Well, I went to one of her lectures at the VAA, and she was talking a lot about her experiences of studying with Robert Zoller and the whole
Yeah.
medieval
Yes.
astrological concepts. And so yeah, that was one of yeah, that I guess that was also one of my first experiences of traditional astrology. But no, I wish I had have been able to
No,
engage
I,
in
I was
Robert
I was
Zoller's
I
course.
was just trying to find out which influences were influencing you. So no
Mm.
Robert Zoller direct course experience. You were a student of Chris Brennan. You were never a student of Ben Dykes, I assume. What you
No,
said?
but I saw he did have a course that I wanted to, he had just put a course out. And that was booked out in, I think, a day. So I need to get onto social media quicker so that I can actually
Or
book, because I would love to study with
you
him.
could ask him via email to book you on the waiting list for the next course, so it might be easier.
Yes,
So,
that's brilliant.
how about the School of Traditional Astrology, Deborah Holding in England? Did you
Mhm.
attend courses there?
I attended the courses that were run in Australia. So I did the horary practitioner level course,
In
and then
Australia, in
in
Australia.
Australia,
Was that
yes,
was a present course where you met the people, or was it
face to face.
face
Yep,
to
face
face?
to face. And it was just about 15 minutes from me, because they ran it as a retreat. They came to, because I live next to a place called Hepburn, which is a spa region where
Okay,
there's lots of mineral springs. And so they
okay.
ran the course there. So it was just in my doorstep.
When was
So,
that? When was that?
when was that? 2016, I think it
Okay.
was, like, or 2015,
So you're
something like
already a
that.
little bit more experienced with astrology and consulting and
Yeah,
all
and
that.
I was glad that I had that bit of background,
Yeah,
going into that course. Yeah, and then a couple of years later, Lily Lehman came out and taught one of her
yes.
first medical astrology course with the STA. She
Uh,
came out to Hepburn, so that was
yeah,
great to spend the whole week with Lily Lee, and
yeah, okay.
she's just a fantastic astrologer.
So you stayed in Australia doing your education in astrology, basically.
Well, I was just very lucky for that,
Yes,
to be at
yes.
my doorstep. I also studied with a Hindu astrologer for a little while. I studied the systems approach in Hindu astrology, but unfortunately he passed away, so we
Okay.
couldn't.
Did,
And th-
how
that
do you
was, I think,
how do you manage to do that? Because that's sidereal astrology.
yeah, I know, and I do look at horoscopes.
I would never dare to try that, even to
All
combine
right.
the tropical astrology with the sidereal. I would get a knot in my brain. It would never work with me. How do you do that?
Well, I would use Hindu techniques with a sidereal chart, and I would use Hellenistic techniques with the tropical charts. Basically, like, if I was to, like, we had quick email about the dodecatemoria, and I would have a quick glance sometimes, but I actually like looking at the sidereal of that, because it, it was such the 12 parts was such a big deal in the Hindu astrology, even though it was used
And in the
in
Hellenistic is
Hellenistic. Yeah,
Manilius,
that
or Manilius book 2 line 739 something. He talks about the dodecatemoria, and
yes,
in the tradition it was one of the most important technique. It's just forgotten
yeah,
today. It's
it's
just
forgotten.
forgotten.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um, when I look at the Atmakarika, I often will look at that for a client, just to have in the background the
What is
planet
that?
with the high.
What is that?
It's the
Actor.
soul, Atma, soul, and Karaka, significator. It's a significator for the soul. It's kind
Okay.
of like the Lord of the genitor, or the Almutin of the chart,
Okay, let's stop here. We don't want to go into sidereal at all. Just
Mhm.
to get a feeling now, basically one could say you had personal trainer Chris Brennan, Deborah Holding's course in horary astrology, right?
Mhm.
And Lee Lehman in the School of Traditional Astrology part with the medical course, medical astrology. What else teacher did we miss still now? Do we have them
Well,
all?
my my Sean McNamara, who was from Melbourne School of
Well,
Astrology.
that was the first one, right? That was the
Yes.
first teacher. Yeah.
Then Neville Lang, who was quite a well-known astrologer locally here.
Oh,
He
okay.
was he was also a computer programmer. He had a lot to do with uh, solar fire as well, because solar
Okay.
fire was developed by an Australian
Yes, I know. I know.
family.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
I know.
So Neville Lang was a distributor for them, and he was also a great Hindu astrologer. So I actually studied with him before I got into traditional astrology. And so when I got into traditional astrology, I saw the parallels, and I really liked the systematic approach to traditional astrology,
Okay.
which I
Okay.
thought was missing as a structure. Me being
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Saturnian,
Okay.
I like that structure.
So we have them all, the teachers.
Who else were my teachers?
Because I'm missing the magical teacher.
Oh,
Those
right.
people don't sound too magical to me.
No, a lot of the magical stuff was my own self-exploration and I guess my heritage, like from my father's practice, like family cultural practices.
Okay, okay,
Um,
okay, but it doesn't fall from the heaven. You have either have a teacher or a book. Did you study the Picatrix?
oh, well, I did later on, but I would argue it kind of did fall from the heaven for me because my father passed away as when I was quite young,
Yes.
and I have always felt his presence, and I really felt he has been guiding me throughout all of my magical journeys because when I go back to his temple and I see what goes on, I I'm in awe because it's what I do, but from a Western sense. But I might have studied the Hermetic texts or like studied some and practiced some rituals that were more based on Western sort of ritual magic or ceremonial magic. Um, and I see so many parallels there.
Okay,
So
okay,
I feel like I was the Asian girl with this sort of moral obligation to perform and to live out this life, this magical life, but I was just plonked into this Western culture and I had to just make do with the resources I had. And so that turned out to be firstly, like say, spiritualism, maybe astrology was part of it, but then getting into, yeah, more of the grimoire works as well. I also am a follower of Gordon White,
okay.
who is a do you know Gordon White
No,
from he's from Australia, but he's a magical practitioner for want of a better word, but he's quite his community he runs courses there and he's very well versed in a lot of the Western occult systems, like all the
yeah.
grimoires, chaos magic, lots of, yeah, he's a very learned authority on that
Okay.
figure
How
topic.
how about a Chinese tradition? Do you do I Ching?
I do. I am slowly getting into it. So I'm
Okay,
actually also studying. I'm coming to the US in April, and I'll be doing a Taoist internal alchemy course with Master Wu. So Master Wu is a fifth, I think, generation lineage holder of his lineage. He's from China originally, but he resides in Sweden.
okay.
And he is a master in all of the Taoist arts. So everything from astrology to qigong, um, to calligraphy to music,
Yeah, okay.
I Ching. So
Yeah,
like it's a whole such holistic system. It's considered one system. So he teaches the heavenly stems and the earthly branches.
okay,
And so that's what and so for his form of remediation, in fact, is through qigong. So
okay,
he would look at something in a chart, and if there was some kind of deficiency or something that we had to remediate, he would have a qigong form that you would
okay,
practice. Yeah,
okay.
so that's what I'm going to be learning in my course this year. So that's I'm coming full circle round back to my Taoist roots again, and I
Yeah,
Ching was
okay.
my
Yeah.
introduction towards that. Yeah.
How about in one of your videos you were talking about Firmicus Maternus, Book 2, Chapter 31, textbooks versus engaging our divine mind, sort of astrology as an alchemical manifestation. Would you a little bit elaborate on that aspect?
Yeah, that chapter really, Maternus, it's a difficult book to read. Like the languaging is quite difficult for me anyway. Um, but he has that whole chapter on, fate and examples of fate, right? Like, how is it that a person that is so noble, has the worst thing happen to them and vice versa. But in that chapter, he talks just about, I guess, self cultivation. Like to be an astrologer,
Yes.
one must need to I think the words that he used was to be chaste and to have lots of virtue and purity. And, you know, although that's not always the case today, like, no, you know, like, I don't think people take it to that nth degree, but I do believe there's a lot in that we as astrologers need to be grounded in our practice. I think it's good to have some form of spiritual practice
Okay.
in whatever form that takes, whether it's a religion or whether it's just you know,
Yeah,
a
I agree. Yeah,
mindfulness
yeah.
walk. Yeah.
But we are not the majority, right?
No, we're not.
We are
And
not.
yeah,
Okay.
that's what
Okay.
that
Okay.
chapter is
Yes.
all
Okay.
about.
Okay. How in your homepage or in one of your videos, I don't remember. You talking about yourself as someone in the Hermetic tradition. Is that correct?
I would believe so. I mean, astrology is a technical Hermetica subject, and I also tinker a lot with making herbal medicines and spagyric medicines.
Yes.
Um,
We come to that in a second. Hermes Trismegistus, there is a university institution in Amsterdam where the professor is Walter Hanegraaff. It's about Hermeticism and its history and philosophy. Any connections to Amsterdam, to the books of Walter Hanegraaff, or is Walter Hanegraaff a non-starter with you?
no, I haven't delved into his
Okay,
books,
okay, no
unfortunately.
problem. How about theurgy? You are doing theurgical work. I hope I pronounced that correct. You're
Yes.
doing that. Is that in the tradition of Jamblichus, or do you have another tradition?
Well, I feel the theurgy, yeah, I guess it's the like I guess it's like advocating a sense of free will in some kind of way with that interaction of being able to change the course of fate, like through
Yeah,
whatever
yeah,
forms of devotion and
yes,
whatnot. Um, yeah, so are you talking about my personal practice or
yes, yes,
yeah?
yes.
Okay, so yeah, I do ceremonial theurgic work, you know. When the time is right. And yeah, I do follow the Picatrix uh, criteria or formula of trying to elect times that are of the theurgical grade. And so I am actually planning to be working more this year with the decans
Okay.
in my theurgic work because I'm in a solar perfection year, and every perfected year I'm in, I always try and find some form of practice that resonates um, with that planet. And so I see the decans as a very solar kind of system to be going through. So I am actually planning on doing a bit of a decan walk myself this year and using theurgy uh, as a form of connecting to those uh, portions of the sky and the deities and entities that reside in that.
Georg Philipp Friedrich von Hardenberg called Novalis that fate and soul are only two terms for the same principle. Would you agree? It's cited by Liz Green in her book, The Astrology of Fate, which can be bought on Amazon.com. What's
It's a
your
great book.
What's your opinion
Mm.
on this statement that Novalis, cited by Liz Green, fate and soul are two terms for the same principle? Would you agree on that?
Hmm. I would. I feel like they're parallel and all going in the same direction. I feel soul um, is a little bit more internally driven, whereas fate feels a little bit more like it has an external it's like fate is the carrier of the soul to me.
Okay.
Mm.
For the German
I don't feel
viewers,
that.
the book Fate and Astrology is in German available by Astronova. It's Liz Green, Schicksal und Astrologie. So if the German viewers or people who speak German can read it in a nice German edition. Let's get to Reverend Janglebones. I have to jump because time is limited. You don't have the next 5 hours to talk with me. So let's get to some more of your experiences. You you didn't meet Reverend Janglebones. You found it on the internet. Is that correct?
So I found Reverend Janglebones through the Rune Soup community, which is Gordon White's community. So it's a very
Ah,
magical community. And in fact, there's a lot of ceremonial magicians there.
okay.
And he's one of them. And yeah, I just love the book that he has written on the new prayers to the 7 planets. And I do use those prayers. I have a daily planetary prayer practice. So I do alternate between that and the Orphic hymns. But yeah, they're really lovely, powerful prayers, I think, to use. So yeah, so that's how I found him. And he seems to have some really, great stuff going on. So you can check out his website there.
Do you have a personal training group which you are training in astrology?
I beg your pardon?
Do you have a local group of students in astrology and or magic and or hermetism and or I Ching and or Tao Te Ching? Any local students you are teaching?
I do have a group of students more for chart reading practice. But
Ah,
yes,
okay.
yep.
But that is face to face.
No, most of my work is online.
Ah,
Yeah.
so there's no face to face group in Guildford.
No, not at this stage. No. Be
Okay,
nice to, but I don't think there'll be enough people, to be honest.
well, you never know. Okay, coming back to Guildford, because we have to. This is a talk like question and answers, like I did with Ray Merriman. If I would talk to you in detail, we would need 10 hours, wouldn't we? I did this with Peter Niehenke. We had 22 hours video, but I suppose you wouldn't have the time to do
Wow.
that. So we have to constrain ourselves for this talk, and we want to get to the free will and astrology in a second. Now, basically, one could say you are trained, well educated in traditional astrology, Hellenistic, medieval, Arabic, and Renaissance astrology. These are 3 different chapters: the Hellenistic part, the Arabic, Baghdad, medieval part, and with that, the Latin translation up to um, uh, the Italian is now. Ben Dykes did translate him. I just missed the term. It doesn't matter. And then the Renaissance.
Bonatti?
Bonatti, right. We have Bonatti, we have Abu Mashan all around him. And then we have the Renaissance astrologers represented, let's say, William Lilly and Morin de Villefranche. Where would you constellate yourself? Do you take them all and mix a big soup and mix everything which you like and do some ingredients from the I Ching with it and some theology? How would you describe your personal worldview in astrology? What are you? Are you an astrologer who knows everything and mixes everything, or are you in a very specific Hellenistic approach, or more
Mm.
Arabic approach, or more Renaissance approach? What's your personal worldview in astrology, in traditional astrology?
Well, yeah, I like to describe myself as a classical astrologist, as in, classical as in anything before the 17th century, but with a
Wait a
deep
minute.
passion.
Before the 17th or before the 18th century? Because 17th
So,
century would include Lily, and the formulation before the 17th century would exclude Lily. What's about Lily?
well, I do use Lily.
So
Like I
what?
love Lily's text.
So when you say
1700s.
you
Yes,
see
but
you say everything before the 1800, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay.
I always
Okay.
get that wrong. Um, so anything. I'm into ancient texts, right? With a deep passion. I love the Arabic, Persian Arabic sort of era, like that sort of 8th to the 10th century type stuff.
Eighth to
I
the
just.
10th, eighth to the 10th. So that doesn't include Ibn Ezra.
Oh, what was he?
He was
Ibn Ezra was slightly after. He was more.
he was 11 1140, he was starting his journey, so that would be 12th century.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I appreciate.
Bonatti would be 13th century, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, the later Latin period, I do like it. There's definitely techniques that I use, and like especially some of like I love Bernardi's take on like using the community to describe essential dignities, for example. Like
Yes.
I love it, but I feel like I just love the stuff that comes out of that Arabic Persian era. I love the magic of that time. I love the techniques of the time. I just feel I have a strong resonance to that. And of course, the Hellenistic era, it's so fundamental, and yeah, a lot of it was brought into the Arabic period, but just the stories and the myths was how I started learning astrology, and then to be
Okay.
able to come back to that from a traditional perspective, and bringing them alive through theurgic practices is what I love. I'm
Okay.
getting
Okay.
a more embodied sense of these mythologies, which was how I started in astrology, through these stories.
Do you have these books? Three books of occult philosophy by Agrippa von Nettesheim in English
Yes,
translation? You have them.
yes.
What's your opinion on them?
It's very heady. I use them. I use the sections more on the planetary sigils part. Where I need to sort of start gathering materia. Like it's to me, I use it as like a recipe book in a way.
Okay. Okay.
Um, yeah, and I like the sigil stuff that's in there.
Okay. You have a special approach to producing medicine, herbal medicine with magical approach in the background, and you're talking about spagyric, right?
hmm Yes.
This is a tradition from Paracelsus in Europe. Paracelsus was an Austrian, traveling more or less Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. We have a tradition in Germany with Alexander von Bernus on spagyric. Did you ever hear of him?
hmm
What's your approach to Alexander von Bernus?
Well,
How did you get to know about it? Because that's a very specific knowledge. Not many people know the name, and very few of them would even know about his Bergeric approach. This is anthroposophical approach, but more or less
yeah,
inspired by
yeah.
Rudolf Steiner. How about yourself? How do you see Alexander von Bernus?
Well, I had come across some of his works, and I think didn't he have a publication or something? And I had sort of read about him, and come across some of his works, and I had done some sort of reading into the whole Steiner philosophy. One of my child goes to a Steiner school as well, so
Okay, okay.
yeah, yeah. So, and I have come across several people in my lifetime that were in the anthropological movement. So I had, just through circles. But, with my spagyric work and medicine making, I always team it up with magical elections. So, and because I'm a grower as well, so I have a full process in like from start to finish where I plant the seeds at the hour, like if I have an intention of creating say a Venus medicine, I might have elected a time, and I will start by planting the seeds at the right Venus hour with a prayer, and I'll, sanctify the moment. All the harvesting is done at the right planetary hour. I then, collect the herbs, prepare it. I soak it in the alcohol, and then we'll prepare the things and put it at the altar for the moment of the election. And that's when I actually like do the pouring. Like I prepare everything there at the electional window. I will pour the medicines, pour the alcohol in, shake it, agitate it, stir it, and hold it over the smoke. Run a full ceremonial um, process around that to create that talisman. And a lot of the practices also come from the Picatrix as well. Some of my inspirations as to which incense to use and what magic of materia. And then throughout, after that electional window and the ceremony is closed, the altar will stay as a living altar for a period of time in which I will keep preparing the herbal medicine. So once it's been soaking for 2 to 3 weeks, depending on what herb it is, at the right hour, I'll strain it out. I will collect the stuff that's left over. I'll also calcinate the strained material into a fine, into the fine, the dust, the white, the white dust. I'll make what do you call a distilled form of the herb, a evaporated form of that herb, to then evaporate the calcinated material till I get the crystals, and then I mix the tincture back into the crystals. So that's my mixing the salts back into my tincture. So all of this is done on the hour with like prayers and with
Okay.
yeah. So when I create one of these, like, it's got to be a worthwhile uh, election to be able to go through this
How,
process for
how, how
me.
about how about the legal background in Australia? Are you allowed to sell the end product of your herbal medicine to customers, or is that forbidden?
Oh, I'm not sure. I guess if you say it's not for internal use, there's no reason why you can't. But
Ah,
I don't generally sell them. It's for my own
okay,
practice because
okay,
I will use like
yeah,
I
yeah, okay,
I w- I had a few tinctures before I jumped online here tonight, and like I use it for my daily planetary prayers.
okay. I
Um,
understand. I was just
yeah,
wondering whether it was a medicine for customer use or for your personal use. So it's for your personal use. Okay.
yeah.
So there is a book in German, Metaphysics and Religion. Through its origin in the spirit, the soul of man is always already free in itself, but the soul only realizes its freedom for itself when it is active in the spirit. For Plotinus, the rationally determined will is not distinct from the virtuous will. These contents of the thinking cognition of the spiritual soul are the ideas immanent to the divine spirit, which is why for Plotinus the freedom of the will of the human soul is ultimately founded in the spiritual soul. Our talk we had up till now sounded to me like you could concur with that. Is that correct, my impression?
I'll have to sit with that. Which is Yeah, I mean, I find the important thing for me is to have an embodied sense of spirit. So I'm assuming that's what he means by
Yeah,
being active in the
let's
spirit.
let's let's stand in there. You're not very much opposed to it. Let's put it this way.
No, no.
Very,
It's
very
just
good.
a different language. Yeah, a different
Yeah,
language
yeah,
that I
okay.
would be using. Yeah.
To ponder as a reality, a couple of things. Dr. Robert Hand on the United Astrology Congress in 1986, quote, astrology is applied mysticism. What do you
Mm.
think about that?
That's clever. It's a clever way of putting it, applied mysticism. Yeah, it is. Not many
Okay.
people would think of it that way, especially in the modern psychological world where we want to sort of
Yeah,
draw out
yeah,
all of
yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah,
I
okay.
think it was, yeah, Liz Green that said that, really we haven't spoken of the word fate, basically
We're
since
ge-
the
we're getting we're,
70s.
we're we're closing up the talk and coming to the free will part. Just the last quote: "Astrology as the ritual to experience the numinosum, the unknowable archetypes, the children of nous, an attempt to come into cautious contact with the self." That's bordering on Carl Gustav Jung and on Neoplatonic viewpoints. Is that something you could live with?
Totally.
Okay, the
Absolutely.
rest the people can read by themselves. And now for the viewers, we close down the talk about the biography of Shu Yap, lecturer at Kepler College, with an interesting talk about solar returns and all the surrounding aspects. And we are closing down the part of the biography part. And now we come to free will in astrology. We have a series running on our other channel. If the people want to find the channel where the talks about free will are be done, that's this channel. All these people are my partners. The talk with Shu Yap will be posted additionally on this channel as well, and there will be a minute in information like with Mel Priestley when the talk about free will is starting. I suppose it's after 120 minutes. So let's go into free will in astrology. And there is on the film list, on this playlist, there is a talk by Professor Dr. Lionel Corbett for Pacific Institute in I think it's San Francisco, California. It's called Fate and Destiny. Shu and myself have watched the video, and I have some questions about the video. I want to ask Shu how she thinks about what Lionel Corbett was saying. First, how much do we participate in meeting our fate?
How much do just the average person, or
It's up to you how you want to interpret that. How much do we participate,
I think a lot of people.
or we too, Shu and Volker?
Yeah, I think a lot of people participate in their fate unconsciously.
Okay.
Because ultimately one will meet their fate, and if you're not conscious of that, you would just kind of view that as a just a linear form, just a form, linear rollout of events that happen based on your choices and circumstances and whatnot. But it takes a kind of person to actually step outside of themselves, like beyond their material kind of body, to be able to look down and see that there was a kind of rollout of events that were, somewhat predetermined, and that we got to it in some way. I mean, it's interesting because it's like it's like there is a determined fate that we all have to live out, but yet the idea of having free will is also there, and definitely we all have free will, but the outcome would be determined by fate.
Okay. When we read the myth of air in Plato's Republic, he's talking about Ananke, necessity, and the children of Ananke, Cloto, Lachesis, and Atropos. How do you have a personal relation to this myth of air and these fate, Moira, Norns?
I mean, I love it's just so clever the way these Greek myths just illustrate these topics in such a beautiful story. And yeah, like the idea of necessity is one that resonates with me a lot. I mean, maybe it's my Saturnian kind of you know slant on things, but yeah, I do think the Moira, has a deep role in the way that we live out our lives. Um, that one really can't escape what the Moira has set out for us. It is something that we need to befriend in some kind of way, to embrace the fate and to change our relationship with with our reactions to the fate, which will then ultimately be able to change our um, acceptance of it. And I think that's the big lesson. People that fight fate are and the good and the bad that come of it, are the ones that will be calling it the work of the devil and whatnot, right? But those that are in acceptance, the free and willing acceptance of fate, will allow one to have the most sense of autonomy, because it's changing our relationship and working in a co-participatory relationship with fate, as opposed to it being an antagonistic external challenge.
That sounds to me a little bit Stoic, like a Stoic philosophy. Would you agree that you are a Stoic?
Yeah, I would argue. Yeah, but have you ever listened to Ben Dyke's interpretation of free will
Yes,
from the Stoics' perspective?
I have his Greek lecture when he was in Istanbul about free will. I've listened to that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he argues, and I tend to agree, because I tend to think that the more we talk about determinism and free will, the more similar the two concepts are. That I don't think that there's actually much difference between the two of them, and maybe it's because of this non-dual kind of perspective that I have from a Taoist background,
Yeah,
that
okay.
that our free will is essentially the influenced by the collective movement of whatever we find ourselves in. And so Ben Dykes argues that, like, in that stoic and deterministic mindset, that it is the will that changes. So he argues that to to get the best out of a deterministic uh, situation is to actually empower people with knowledge and education and opportunities, so that they can then contribute to that collective fate, if you know what I mean. So,
Yeah, okay.
I tend to agree that fate and free will, the more and more I think about it, the more similar they become. That it's not this and the other. It's a partnership.
A quote from Siggy Jung: "If you don't love your fate, then you are neurotic." What do you think
Mm,
about that?
yeah. Yeah, I think that's the idea of having a relationship with fate. If it's
Yeah, yeah.
having a relationship with fate gives you a sense of awareness of what's to come, that paranoia, so to speak. And to be honest, like, that's what we're doing as astrologers. We are the mouthpiece of fate, as Liz Green would call it. We're there to actually read the fates of people, and simply by being aware of what's coming, even if it's a difficult thing that's coming, and I've seen this in my client work, one can start to change their orientation and their relationship to it, so that you might not need to do anything to change the situation, but by simply knowing and being aware of it changes your own sense of angst behind it. And so I'm assuming what Jung is calling neurosis. Like, if you're not aware of what's actually coming, or that there might be an interplay happening around you, and you've got no understanding of that at all, it's like being lost in a rapid where you don't know where up or down is. You're just, yeah, that's what your mind is. It's neurotic. I'm assuming that's what Jung is describing there.
When I was doing the talk about free will in astrology with Dr. Schön in Hannover in German, we came to the conclusion the stars, let's put it this way, like in the terminology of Thomas Aquinas, the stars force you in certain areas of the life. The stars make you leaning towards something in certain areas of the life, and there is a third part, free will. You can do what you want. Would that be your approach as well?
So there were three. Repeat that again. The
The stars
stars,
are forcing without compromise.
right?
then the stars make you lean to something. In German, the Sterne machen geneigt, sie zwingen this. Stars lean you, they don't force you. That's the second part. And then there's a third area of life where you are completely free to determine what you want to do.
Okay, so I believe all three are actually in existence, and you see this in the Hindu tradition where they have different kinds of karma. There's karma that you can change and karma that you can't change, and
That's
karma
exactly,
that's
yeah. Yeah, genau. That's the same thing. Yeah, that's the same thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they propose that you can tell that in a chart by looking simply at what sign is ruling that particular house to determine that karma. So a fixed sign might show that that house is um, the karma has already started. You've inherited something that's already, the ball's already been rolled. They also talk about another type of karma where, if you can put effort and perseverance towards something, you can change the karma. And that's often represented by jewel signs on that house. Or there's another kind of karma where it's all about your good choices and actions that can easily change the karma, and that's when there's a movable sign on that house. So and I tend to agree with that because, like, based on my life experience, there are some things you can change and some things you can't. And when you go and see a modern day therapist, one of the things they always say to you, okay, we can't change this situation, but we can change what we do. And so you only need to worry about what you can control. That's often one of the key guidance that is given in a modern therapeutic kind of environment, and it really reflects this kind of three types of karma that we find in Hindu astrology, the intensity of the karma. These fixed karmas, like, it might be generations ago that it started, and you were just born into that lineage of having to roll it out. And one of the things that I find very interesting in chart work is that when there's planets at the bendings of the nodes, at 90 degrees across angles of the nodes, those are the planets and the houses and areas of life where we have the most conscious will, where we have the opportunity to break free from generational trauma and generational karma, because it's the furthest away from the nodal action, which is all about our very fated obligations in life, obligations that keep us safe and secure and obligations that push us to our limits. So when I see bendings, planet at the bendings, very prominent in a chart, I know that person is somehow a change agent for their lineage, of the topic related to the house and that planet that's being signified there at the bendings.
Okay. Would you say we covered your philosophy of free will in astrology, or do you want to add something? Hello? Your audio is
Add
I can't I
something.
can't I can't
I
I
do actually. I can you.
I we got
Can you
a
hear me now?
yes, I can hear you now. Okay.
All right. Yeah. I think in a modern day context, we are less. We do talk about the fated aspects of life much less these days, because there is, especially in the Western cultures, more of a sense of an expectation of autonomy and free will, and control. And one of the things that the psychotherapists, the Jungian analysts that I really enjoy listening to, they're always talking about the inner image, that and that's where synchronicities can occur. So we can see or experience something at the inner level, and sometimes that manifests on the outer level. And I feel that with modern psychological astrology, what happened was that there was a explosion of a new creative source of experiences of planetary archetypal influences that doesn't have to be a concrete material experience. Right. And so that's where when we read ancient texts, we see Saturn, eclipse is about to happen, and the king is going to die, a solar eclipse, but eclipses happen all the time, and kings or our prime ministers and our leaders don't die. Yes, they might have a really difficult month, but they don't die. But something possibly in their inner image dies, or like there is a death symbol in there. But and I think Liz Green speaks of it, that in this modern world, we have expanded our capacity to have the inner image experiences, so that we don't always necessarily need to have that external image manifest. And so I guess that's what I wanted to add to this piece, is that it doesn't always need to be fatalistic, especially when you read these ancient texts, and it does sound really fatalistic. But building awareness, whether it's through an astrological reading, whether it's your own, whatever form of self-cultivation or divining, building that awareness in you or in a client is helping to build these inner images, and to not to control them, but to gain some kind of relationship with them, so that they they can be more malleable. They're playing out more in that level of that the karma, where you can test out your actions and choices on that inner level before you start externally manifesting that. And I think that is
Okay.
one really great asset that we have in the modern day astrological consulting space. And that's why it's really important, because we can prevent a lot of catastrophes from happening, or fatalistic views of the world, or um, just intense kind of over dramatic, harming kind of reactionary responses, to a session, by just like having that goal of building awareness and playing with that internal image and exploring it through active imagination or through meditation and journeying and whatnot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your practice in Guildford, what do you offer? You offer consultation via Zoom for the whole world, I suppose. Do you have
Yes.
besides Kepler College, in Kepler College you are teaching courses. How about in your practice in Guildford? Do you have another track of courses you offer to the public?
Yeah, well, I do run this third house studio container that's closed for the moment, but I'll start up another container after this one finishes
Okay.
in March. I'm also, I'm doing some lectures throughout the year. So I've got the VAA lecture booked in for February. I'm also presenting at Astrology Niagara, a Canadian astrological membership-based organization, I guess. I'm doing a talk there on the Venus cycle. I'm taking a bit of a break around April, May as I go overseas to study, and and then I'll be coming back and getting back into consultation work. I also mentor students of astrology.
What do you
Who
do
would like.
when you mentor students? Do you guide them through the whole education process till they are able to do consulting work?
Yeah, it's based on what they want. So a student might come to me and say, I need to like work on my consulting preparation, or I'm usually it's technique based. Like I want to work on monthly analysis, or I want to work on Fidaria or something. So I would then, have one-on-one sessions with these clients
Is that
and
60
build
minute
up their
sessions,
knowledge.
60 minute sessions or longer?
60 to 120 minutes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We work out a bit of a tailored program
Okay.
based on what they want. So, yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would be the fees you charge for 60 minutes or 100 minutes for this kind of training?
Oh, I'll have to remember. It's on my website. I think it's about it's on my booking site. If you go to intercycle.as.me, I think it's listed there. So I've listed it in US dollars and Australian dollars.
So it would be on this homepage of yours. So where would one look this up? Where you,
Go to
wow.
book a session at the top.
Okay, book a session.
The green button right at the top.
That would be this one.
Oh,
Natal consultation,
maybe
forecast
that one.
session,
Yep,
express
go
reading,
down. Oh,
hourly consultation, astrological mentoring. That would be the one, right?
yeah,
That's
that's the one. How much?
that's the one. So that would be
90
for,
minutes. There we go.
yeah, yeah. That would be
And
okay. That would be what you offer, and then there's
that's based on that's based on a one-off session. But if I usually do packages for if it's going to be say over 6 months, once a month every 6 months, then we work out a bit of a
okay.
package to make it a bit more viable. Yeah.
So we have presented your practice, we have presented your worldviews, your astrology, your teachers, your approach to personal medicine. Did I miss to ask you something which I should have asked you?
I think you've been quite thorough. I can't think of anything else that we need to speak of. But yeah, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure to be able to share some of my stories with you. And yeah, you're very thorough in your research.
Thank you. It was very nice talking to you, and thanks to Shu Yap from close to Melbourne in Australia, and thanks to the viewers for stopping by, and I stopped the recording.